Good day, everyone. I am Crystal Kenyu, and we will here to tackle the roles of plants. So, first role of plants is communication media. So, if planning is programming, then plants clearly serve in two capacities or role. They are media, they are media for communication and devices for control. So, these roles are plants are of course reasons for planning. Both roles draw on the analytical character of plans, namely the representation of strategies in decomposed and articulated form, if not quantified, then at least quantifiable. Why program strategy? The most obvious reason is for coordination, to ensure that everyone in the organization falls in the same direction. So, which may sometimes be facilitated by specifying that direction as precisely as possible. So, plan. As they emerge from strategic programming as programs, schedules, budgets, and so on. It can be prime media to communicate not just strategic intentions, but also what each individual in the organization must do to realize them. And so far, of course, as common direction is more important than individual discretion. So as communication media, it informs people of intended strategy and its consequences. Thus, Kane referred to formal planning activities as fulfilling certain vital functions in coordinating strategies. It includes awareness building, consensus generating, and commitment affirming. So, planning forces managers to communicate systematically about strategic issues. So, improvements in communication and coordination are not as Hogarth and Makridakis claim just functional side effects of planning, but the essential reasons to engage in it. So communication through planning provides a means whereby management as a whole on a regular basis can talk about strategy. So it is planning's conceptual tidiness that may provide a better vocabulary for communication within organizations. So, communication can be external as well as internal. So, it is with plans being used to seek the tangible as well as moral support of outside influencers. Next, second rule of plans, which is control devices. So, this illustrates the point that communication can sometimes get rather close to control. At the limit, the two emerge as opposite sides of the same coin. So, the substantive purpose of strategic programming is to exercise deliberate control to predetermine behavior by dictating what people must do to realize a given intended strategy. So, plans, as control devices, they go further, specifying what behaviors are expected of particular units and individuals in order to realize a strategy. So, and then being available to feed back into the strategy making process comparisons of these expectations with actual performance. So, in a brief, colorful discussion by Sayard and March, they make four observations on plans within an organization. So, first, a plan is a goal. So, a planning prediction functions both as a prediction of sales, cost, profit, level, and so forth, and also as a goal for such factors. Under some circumstances and within limits, an organization can induce behavior design to confirm its prediction or goal. So second, a plan is a schedule. So it specifies intermediate steps to a predicted outcome. The firm is forced by its plan if for no other reason into the specification of acceptable achievement levels for its subunits as well as for the organization as a whole. Third, a plan is a theory. For example, the budget specifies a relationship between such factors as sales and costs on the one hand and profits on the other hand, and thereby permits the use of sales and cost data as guideposts to the achievement of a satisfactory level of profits. And the last one, a plan is a precedent. It defines that the decisions of 1 year and thereby establishes a prima facie case for continuing existing decisions. So that's the 4 observation and plans within an organization. So plans as controls serve not only top management wishing to control those below it in the hierarchy, but also sorts of influencers over each other. In an organization in which goal and technology are unclear, plans and the insistence on plans become an administrative test of will. So, if a department wants a new program badly enough, it will spend a substantial amount of effort in justifying the expenditure by fitting it into a plan. If an administrator wishes to avoid saying yes to everything but has no basis for saying no to anything, he tests the commitment of the department by asking for a plan. So next, strategic control. With regard to strategy, plans can help to effect control in a number of ways. The most obvious is control of the strategy itself. Indeed, what has long paraded under the label of strategic planning has probably been more about strategic control. In the traditional view, strategic control has had to do with keeping organizations on their strategic tracks to ensure the realization of intended strategies. Their implementation as expected with resources appropriately allocated. This it supposedly does by subjecting intended strategy and its consequences to a strategic programming, which can then be used as the standard against which to measure accomplishment. So plans as the most operational form of strategy lend themselves naturally to this type of control. Add a feedback loop at the end of the planning cycle to assess the results of the plans, and strategic programming becomes strategic control. We characterize strategic control as two-step process. So the first requires the tracking of realized strategies as patterns in streams of actions to consider the deliberate realization of intended strategies as well as the emergence of unintended ones. So the second step then considers, in a more traditional control manner, how effective for the organization were the strategies that were actually realized. Strategies need not be deliberate to be effective and vice versa. So there has certainly been extensive consideration of unrealized strategies in the literature of planning. So virtually all of it under the guise of the failures of implementation. But deliberate strategies can be successfully implemented and then fail, just as unexpectedly emergent strategies can sometimes succeed. So put another way, strategies may fail not only by being unsuccessfully implemented, but also by being successfully implemented and then providing inadequate. So likewise, strategies can succeed even though they were not initially intended. Planners can hardly dismiss successful strategies just because they were not deliberate. And more to the point here, strategic control must be concerned with the performance of the organization, not the performance of planning. Thank you.
First, role of planners, finders of strategy. Planners, of course, play key roles in the process of planning, namely strategic programming, and in the use of the resulting plans for purposes of communication and control. Lorraine claimed it is a central job of planners to play the instrumental role in the design and implementation of the strategic planning system, as well as to administer or manage the planning process. Both amount to the same role of planners, which we characterize as the finders of strategy, although interpreters of action or simply patterns recognizer might describe it equally well. Logic in action. The expression interpreters of action was inspired by Carl Wieck, who, as we noted earlier, has pursued a major theme in his writing, namely that we make sense of our world by interpreting our own actions. In our terms, for purposes of strategic management, this means that tracking of patterns of action in the organization in order to identify strategies, whether emergent or deliberate. This can serve two purposes. First, it can be used to find fledgling strategies in an unexpected pocket of the organization so that consideration can be given to making them more broadly and deliberately organizational. Second, it can be used to effect strategic control by identifying the organization's realized strategies which can be then compared with its intended ones. Desperately seeking strategies. The first step that we noted in strategic programming is not to create a strategy, but to make it from the strategy formation process and begin its operationalization through codification. The problem is that a dense hierarchy can fail to capture this kind of strategic learning systematically. That way, when appropriate, emergent strategies can be rendered deliberate and obscure ones, pervasive or that burlesque the inconsistencies that tend to arise, and emergent strategies can be cleared up. In fact, this aspect of strategic control may have to depend largely on the planners, because the uncovering of realized strategies as patterns in action to compare with intended strategies likely has to be done comprehensively and systematically, which reflects the comparative advantage of the planners. Unconventional planners. Reference to being systematic, comprehensive, and somewhat more formal should not be interpreted to mean that this role of finding strategies fits into the conventional posture of planners. Some conventional planners have also retreated into the most futile aspect of the catalyst role, namely, employing sterile management to come up with the missing strategies. Planners who wish to call themselves strategic need to perform rules other than conventional strategic programming. Planners who restrict their work to the deliberate strategies formulated systematically preclude themselves from contributing to the strategic process as it must often exist. Second role of planners, analysts. Strategic analysis for managers. Effective managers, we noted earlier, have their fingers on the pulse of their organization and its external context through their privileged access to soft data. The nature of their work favors action over reflection, quick response over long term. They can thus analyze this data, drawing or wherever management science technique seems appropriate to feed their summaries and conclusion to the managers for purposes of strategy making. Every manager has a mental model of the world in which he or she acts based on experience and knowledge. When a manager must take a decision, he or she thinks of behavior alternates within this mental model. External strategic analysis. Porter is the leading spokesman, depends on such an extent on this external strategic analysis. Ghoshal and Wisney went on to identify 6 different functions served by competitor analysis in organizations, all of which together make a nice list of uses of strategic analysis in general. First functions are sensitization, in order to shake up the tropes by challenging the organization's existing assumption about particular competitors, including in some cases changing the definition of the most significant competitor or of the most crucial dimension of competitions. Second, benchmarking, which provides a set of specific measures comparing the firm with its competitors. Third, legitimization, which means to justify certain proposal and to persuade members of the organization of the feasibility and desirability of a chosen course of action. Fourth, inspiration, which gives people new ideas about how to solve problems. In this process, by identifying what other firms had done in similar circumstances. Fifth, planning, namely the use of competitor analysis to assist the formal planning process. Interestingly enough, much more dependent on information from the formal function than any of the other uses. 6. Decision making, meaning contribution of operational and tactical decision making by the line managers, which provided the second largest number of examples cited after planning. Much as planners can study and interpret patterns in the organization's own behavior to identify its emergent strategies, so too can they study and interpret patterns in external environment to identify possible strategic opportunities and threats. Internal strategic analysis and the role of simulation. A good deal of formal analytical technology has been proposed for use here. In particular, formal computer models as simulations of the firm. Computer simulations are simply the most formal of those models. Planners who wish to propose alternate more formal models or conceptual theories to managers must be aware of these informal models and consider their strengths, such as their ability to draw on privileged tacit knowledge, alongside their weaknesses, such as possibly being based on a narrow range of experience. Scrutinization of strategies. A third aspect of strategic analysis concerns the investigation and evaluation of proposed strategies. Scrutinization can also be used to sort out seemingly good and bad strategies. There are several good reasons to view scrutinization as a process of ad hoc analysis rather than a step in planning cycle, the way it is in fact treated, however, implicitly in the literature of the positioning school, which gives far more attention to the evaluation of individual strategies than to other integration in an overall process of planning. In fact, strategy scrutinization can extend, like other forms of strategic analysis, to the point of questioning planning itself. In other words, planners should sometimes question conventionally formulated strategies no less than promote unconventionally formed ones. Third role of planners, catalyst. The planning literature, as we have already seen, has long promoted the role of planner as catalyst. The role of the corporate planner is more of a catalyst and less of a strategist, wrote Chakrabarty. Opening of strategic thinking. To encourage strategic planning, as we have seen, is really to encourage strategic programming and thereby possibly to encourage strategic thinking. Planners may thus appropriately promote strategic programming so that these strategies can be pursued more systematically and extensively. Thus, in our opinion at least, the catalyst role is more appropriately focused on strategic thinking in conjunction with strategic acting than on strategic planning. Role for formalization. Formalization can pertain to time, to location, to participation, to agenda, and to information, as well as, but with only the greatest of care, the process itself. It can help to focus attention, stimulate debate, keep track of issues, promote interaction, and facilitate consensus. The formalization edge. Formalization may be necessary to straighten some of those edges, but it has its own delicate edge beyond which planners should not go. Oftentimes, formalization should not extend much beyond the specification of time, place, and participation. That's all.
The planner as strategies. Holding the title of planner does not preclude imagination, nor does it automatically preclude information. So, we are now prepared to draw together a discussion of the rule for planning, plans, and planners. First, by showing the rules in comprehensive framework, then by introducing more formally or conventional and unconventional planners. Finally, by specifying the context in which the various rules and the two kinds of planners seems to be most appropriately used. A plan for planners. Strategic programming are one rule for planning. Is shown feeding out of the black box, starting from the strategies formulated or found and operationalizing them in the three steps of codification, elaboration, and conversion. The final results are detailed plans which themselves serves the rules of communication and control in three directions: out to the external environment, down into the organization, and back to the input end of the strategy formation process in a feedback loop. Another rule for the plans, as simulations, is also indicated as a loop back to strategic analysis. The catalyst rule is showing supporting the black box to encourage strategic thinking, while the planner as strategist is placed tentatively within the box for those planners who manage to get inside. So, why organizations engage in planning with respect of strategy? So first, the answer is to program strategies, that is to operationalize them in their behaviors. Number 2, for purposes of communication. 3, for purposes of control as well as coordination. 4, to, to help find strategies as logics in action. 5, to feed data and analysis into the strategy formation process. 6, to scrutinize the strategies that came out of it. And lastly, to stimulate others to think strategically and be more knowledgeable about the strategy formation process in general. So next, a planner for each side of the brain. So this planner programs intended strategies and sees to it that they are communicated clearly and used for purpose of control. This is the conventional planner we refer to in much of this book who favors the analytical process of the left hemisphere of the human brain. They encourage others to think strategically in Rothenberg's game of the game rather than other writers' procedures. So we are sympathetic to this view, especially for the people who need to set up planning groups and link with the aligned activities of the organization. In this case, a staff planner is required rather than a line manager whose specialized position can often be liability. And that's all. Thank you. The planner as strategies. Holding the title of planner does not preclude imagination, nor does it automatically preclude information. So, we are now prepared to draw together a discussion of the rule for planning, plans, and planners. First, by showing the rules in comprehensive framework, then by introducing more formally or conventional and unconventional planners. Finally, by specifying the context in which the various rules and the two kinds of planners seems to be most appropriately used. A plan for planners. Strategic programming are one rule for planning. Is shown feeding out of the black box, starting from the strategies formulated or found and operationalizing them in the three steps of codification, elaboration, and conversion. The final results are detailed plans which themselves serves the rules of communication and control in three directions: out to the external environment, down into the organization, and back to the input end of the strategy formation process in a feedback loop. Another rule for the plans, as simulations, is also indicated as a loop back to strategic analysis. The catalyst rule is showing supporting the black box to encourage strategic thinking, while the planner as strategist is placed tentatively within the box for those planners who manage to get inside. So, why organizations engage in planning with respect of strategy? So first, the answer is to program strategies, that is to operationalize them in their behaviors. Number 2, for purposes of communication. 3, for purposes of control as well as coordination. 4, to, to help find strategies as logics in action. 5, to feed data and analysis into the strategy formation process. 6, to scrutinize the strategies that came out of it. And lastly, to stimulate others to think strategically and be more knowledgeable about the strategy formation process in general. So next, a planner for each side of the brain. So this planner programs intended strategies and sees to it that they are communicated clearly and used for purpose of control. This is the conventional planner we refer to in much of this book who favors the analytical process of the left hemisphere of the human brain. They encourage others to think strategically in Rothenberg's game of the game rather than other writers' procedures. So we are sympathetic to this view, especially for the people who need to set up planning groups and link with the aligned activities of the organization. In this case, a staff planner is required rather than a line manager whose specialized position can often be liability. And that's all. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I'm going to discuss the planners in context. Which type of planner should be favored in different organizations? Do all need both? Do any need only one or neither? Lawrence suggested the creation of two different planning executives or offices, one to manage the planning processes, the other to counsel the CEO in substantive strategizing matters. Ken saw two groups in a hierarchical relationship. Most successful planners learn to delegate the mechanics of the annual planning process to juniors and actively participated at the heart of strategic processes. We believe, however, the organizations differ in their needs for which planning plan and planner rules are most appropriately played in them, and so require different combinations of the two types of planners. It is to this last issue, the context of planning, that we turn here to complete our discussion. Forms of org- there's are the following forms of organization. First one, the machine organization. Classic bureaucracy, highly formalized, specialized, and centralized, and dependent largely on the standardization of work processes for coordination, common in stable and mature industries with mostly rationalized, repetitive operating work as in airlines, automobile companies, retail banks. The second one, the entrepreneurial organization. Non-elaborated, flexible structure closely and personally controlled by the chief executive who coordinates by direct supervision, common in startup and turned around situation as well as in small businesses. The third one is the professional organization, organized to carry out expert work in relatively stable settings, hence emphasizing the standardization of skills and the pigeonholing of services to be carried out by rather autonomous and influential specialists, with the administrator serving for support more than exercising control, common in hospitals, universities, and other skilled and craft services. The fourth one is the adhocracy organization, organized to carry out expert work in highly dynamic settings, where the expert must work operatively in project teams, coordinating the activities by mutual adjustment, in flexible, usually metric forms of structure found in high technology industries such as aerospace and in project work such as filmmaking, as well as in organizations that have to truncate their more machine-like mature operations in order to concentrate on product development. The last one is the diversified organization. Any organization split into semi-autonomous divisions to serve a diversity of markets, with the headquarters relying on financial control system to standardize the outputs of the divisions, which tend to take the machine form. Strategic programming and the machine organization. The machine form is a highly structured organization, generally with tightly coupled operations that break down its operating work into very fine tasks that can be easily understood and simply executed without much expertise, as in the typical mass production assembly line. Even in their functioning, these organizations fit the classic planning model. They tend to have well-developed technostructures, staff groups, including an important complement of planners, that are charged with developing the systems of formal planning and control the structure and coordinate everyone else's work. Moreover, machine organization favors centralized control with formal power resting at the apex of the hierarchy, where executives are expected to formulate the strategies that everyone else implements. What other form of organization is implied but the traditional machine? Configuration implies system in a most integrated sense. There are no dependent and independent variables in a system. Everything influences and is influenced by everything else. For example, the machine organization requires stability to function, but it also acts to ensure that stability indeed. Planning serves it in both respects, since actively it works to impose stability on the operations and sometimes on the environment as well, while possibly it discourages the radical change that upsets the established stability. This planning is not an arbitrary component of this configuration but an integral element. The machine form not only requires planning, as planning requires the machine form, but planning also enhances its very nature by formalizing its decision process, encouraging the decomposition of its activities, and reinforcing its centralization of power. Right and left-handed planners in machine organization. There is an important place for right-handed planners in the machine organization. They carry out strategic analysis of various kinds, especially in consideration of marginal adjustments to the organization's strategic positions. Periodic industry reviews and competitive analysis seem well suited to this type of analysis. Further encouragement comes from the availability of hard data in the context. Creative planners do more creative and radical analysis as well as search for emergent strategies and serve as catalysts for novel strategic thinking. On one hand, these rules can be upsetting. Creative planners can play havoc with organizations that know what they must do and need worry only about ensuring that they do it as efficiently as possible. And so such worrying must often fall to left-handed planners in their catalyst rule, but that is not an easy role to play, for it necessarily challenges the status quo. Machine organization can exploit given strategies and stable conditions for years, long after left-handed planners gets restless. Left-handed organizations are prone to see threats before the managers do, but often before the threats themselves have to be responded to, or for the matter even exist. Having a clutch of creative planners running loose in an organization that is contentedly pursuing a viable strategy serves no one. And that's all. Thank you.
Good day everyone. Today I will discuss the strategic programming under other conditions. We saw the set of conditions that give benefits to plan the groups to produce a particular kind of organization configuration. Before we consider the other forms of organization, we must review the conditions of it. The opposite of a stable environment is a dynamic one. Label environment that changes regularly if not constant in unpredictable and thus controllable fashion. Formalized planning does not make sense in such environment. Strategic analysis can make sense when carried out flexible and creatively by left-handed planners. To program strategies when reliable predictions cannot be made just to inhibit the organization to solve for the events as they unfold. Left-handed planners can be useful in these circumstances in turbulent, political, noisy organizational situations. Analyze the problems. The absence of stiff length operations can remove a main reason to become involved in formal planning. When the operations of an organizational complex are instead of simple, they need the skilled experts to avoid the planning into trouble. As far as small organizations are connected, we discuss the relatively high cost of planning. There are cases to encourage a small organization to involve in a formal planning. With this conclusion, we must consider plans and planners in the forms of organization. Strategic analysis in the professional organization. This is our second topic. As mentioned, the plans of planning, in its literature and its manifestations in the practice, generally observe the machine and formal planning as the one best way for all organizations. Professional organizations often with most unfortunate consequences. Thus, we have books and articles need formal strategic planning. So, we need book jud para mag-study about aning mga organization sa mga planning, unsay plano sa organization. para mulambo o mo grow. Labi na og naay mga maka-encounter mo problema sa inyong organization, so dali ra siya matagag solution kay na mo may idea ug mga plano. Almost all rely on the conventional assumptions of planning that the strategies must deductive with objectives can be clearly indicated in the central form or formulation of strategies by penetrating and implementation. So i-implement, i-penetrate ug unsa inyong nahibaw-an sa inyong grupo, then magtinabangay mo para mulambo ang inyong organization. Extensive action planning in machine-like support services where some of this is appropriate can withstand. Then, but in the worst case, the holes were damaged, the planner succeeded in plant. The organization was worthy of time, which might become this in the process. So, even though the kanang organization is maka-encounter og mga damages or mga bugat nga mga problema, so basta na lang mo'y kanang pagtinabangay og pagpanaghiusa mo succeed yun mo bisag unsa pa ng problema nga inyong nga modangat sa inyong organization. The reason for problem is not difficult to understand as long as one remains in the form of organization, much a configuration driven by operating work that is highly complex. The result is a strategy that make easy to simultaneously against those machine organization and convention wisdom. The direct influence of siya og lambo. Then the stability of the overall strategy can submit a role in action planning, but the complexity of professional work and its decentralization to the professional operating workers, it is largely or limits at least of the non-progressive work of the support staff or at many wide or peripheral areas of organization activities. Strategic analysis has an important role in the professional organization the usual way. This is because many of the analyses are performed not by staff planners but by the professional themselves, and it is used for central management and coordination in the debate and interactions that make collective process of decision making. Analysis figures prominently in both collegial and political process, stimulated by the existence of ambiguous goals and various actors. So nadyo'y goals ang natong organization, labi na para mulambo siya o magmalampuson. Among ambiguity, it has more lies by analysis that there are more ways in which issues can be lodged with logically, and with various actors there is more reason to structure problems in its own way to direct thinking of others by the use of rational argument. To summarize, analysis in universities is more than a way to interactions rather than solving standards for its kinds. So mas advantage ang analysis sa university kay kuan man siya studyhan jud maayo. It can also be used to help personal understanding of individuals or groups, and also serves as means of communication and attention as we of legitimization decisions as means of consensus building, and perhaps the most important as a conviction. This way, analysis helps to ensure that it has decided in while a degree of justification initiatives had to come from professionals, but the plans serve as a kind of filter to determine which initiative should be favored. But despite limited success, planning seems to be very blunt for instrument here for comparison with machine bureaucracy. Next is planning and analysis in advocacy organization. The enzyme is a project structure that complies the complex skills of different experts to handle another environment, complex and dynamic. planning will lose on all scores. Some as blocks need the complex coupling with a wheel that takes due to NASA race to place invisibility on the moon. The result is apparently a very poor rated strategies that all the targets sets of milestones, then explain big fair discoveries that must meet the creative discovery differences. This is certain in that a little different feature was discovered concurrently between the right performance. Numerous other functions in large development systems were at traditional states there, which managers learn to set their ultimate points and goals and develop operational plans. Planning seems to be dynamic, iterative process that disturbs the government inevitable as a small group of expert and high-level planning strategy. High-level planning strategy can define with when locally wrote into it to maintain flexibility. Perhaps the best way to approach long-term planning such something we should try to avoid. This means that the way they do things must be done as a little as possible. And that's all. Thank you. It is probably insufficient and unclear on the three forms of organizations. It is in the right way to make the competence of the three forms of organization as follows. It is different ways to help with the nature of structure. This can the most the actions of using the use of natural forms. Creative planners will not find a lack of work. We suspect that the really creative health contributions are more likely to find hospitable homes in other form of organizations. That's all. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I will continue our report and I will discuss the minimal rules in the entrepreneurial organization. So what is entrepreneurial organization? So it is a structure that develop ideas from all members promoting alternative views and projects. In the entrepreneurial form of organization, everything revolves around the chief executive or CEO, the one who leads his or her company or the one that guides the business towards the vision. That person controls activities personally through direct supervision. Serious planning may get in the leader's way, impeding free movement as we discussed in the study of Stanford Chain and as was evident in the planning school's treatment of managerial intuition. Plans and planners are likely to meet considerable resistance in the entrepreneurial version of organization, which relies on every different means for coordination and control. The right-handed planner may have the advantage here, since the leader typically needs his or her intuition to be supported by more systematic consideration. But doing that analysis may not be easy given the concentration of so much critical information in the leader's head, in addition to his or her inclination to move opportunistically. The leaders of most entrepreneurial organizations do not relish someone telling them how to make strategy. That process tends to be locked into their own minds in any event. So, we have little need for planners since these are unlikely to develop outside of their own personal control. So, in any event, good intuitive leaders generally do this far better than staff people, particularly in these typically small, simple, and flexible organizations. So, of course, as the entrepreneurial organization grows and begins to take on this machine form, the visionary strategy of the leader may have be pinned down through strategic programming. So next, we have performance control in the diversified organization. So as the company grows, typically it diversifies its product, market, strategies, and then divisionalizes its structures. While the coupling may be tight within divisions, as in machines, it tends to be loose across them. The result is an organization that is increasingly compartmentalized into distinct units, each dedicated to one of these strategies. So, key to the diversified organization is the relationship between headquarters and the divisions. In a diversified organization, the headquarters and divisions must experience some kind of control, usually with regard to financing and performance, but loose enough to allow the divisions to manage their own businesses. The obvious solution is the imposition of objectives and budgets in the forms of systems of performance control. A great deal of the popularity of strategic planning in the American business developed in these very diversified corporations. The Boston Consulting Group's growth share matrix and budgeting to introduce a measure of the former as well as latter. Such external controls can have the effect of encouraging strategic programming within the divisions. The more headquarters distant from the running of a business tries to program its strategy, or encourages it to do the same thing for the wrong reasons, the more it undermines the division's effectiveness. So, there may be a bit of a rule for headquarters planners as catalysts to convey knowledge about the strategy process, but otherwise the rules seem logically left to planners within the divisions themselves. So that's all, and thank you.